This is Every Widow Thing.
Welcome to Every Widow Thing. On this episode, Keira is going to be sharing her story of the day that her husband died. We feel like it's important to share these stories because, number one, it gives you a little insight into what we've been going through, but it also lets people hear that even with something extremely traumatic, you can survive. And that's the whole point of this podcast. We appreciate, Keira, that you're going to share this story. We know some bits may be hazy, whether it's because of grief or in your situation, you were hospitalized. So we will give you grace and please
bear
always,
with me.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So my husband died in June of 2014. It was the 21st of June. We had just celebrated our 13th wedding anniversary on June 2nd. And then Frank's birthday was June 11th. We sent our older two kids off to sleepaway camp for 2 weeks. Aislinn was 11, and it was her second time at the camp, second summer. And Thomas was going for the first time. He was 9 years old. We put the kids on the bus, they go off, and then it's just me and Carys at home. She's 4.5, and Frank was traveling. He was being recruited actually back in New York City for the CEO position. And so that had kind of been the discussion in our house was, we'd been in Austin about 4 years, and it would be possibly moving back to the East Coast, what that would look like. I was sort of reluctant at first. I felt like I didn't want to move the kids. We'd settled in. We'd made good friends. And then I thought about it and I said, hey, you know what? You work hard. If this is your dream job, I support you 100%. I love you. We'll make it work. And that was just kind of our relationship. Like, he worked really hard. He took care of us. And I wanted to support him in any way that I could. So you
had pretty much made the decision.
Yeah, we had kind of had, I was that initial like, oh my God, we're moving again. And then I got on board. And so then he actually was in New York City, I think in the final round of interviews with this company. They said, you're our front runner. And then he flies back to Austin the night before we had to pick up the kids. So he gets home, we go to bed early. Got up really early because the camp's about 3 hours outside of the city in the hill country. And the parent pickup is around 8:30, 9 a.m. So I'm throwing all the snacks and the iPads and all the goodies in the car.
Oh, yeah.
And then I've got my 4-year-old, so she's got all her gear and some stuffed animals and things like that. And we get on the road.
And how long had the kids been at camp?
2 weeks.
Okay.
So they hadn't seen...
Right. They saw their dad 2 weeks prior.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And then he'd been out of town, so it was sort of me and Carys in that final week. So we get on the road, it's dark, it's 5-ish, and then about a half hour or so outside of town, we're on this road, 290 West. It's a two-way kind of highway, country highway, a little bit hilly. And he and I are talking about the move back. I mean, we're talking about, if we go back to New York City, like what area? Would we go back to Montclair where we lived before? Would we try to live in the city? Would we try something else? And I just sort of, fortunately, I kind of remember him smiling at me. He was a very upbeat, positive guy. And I just remember we're probably joking about something and he's looking at me and smiling at me. And then it was just blackness. And I was kind of tumbling in blackness. This is a little hard to talk about. Mm-hmm. But what happened was we were, like I said, on this kind of hilly section of the road. And someone was traveling in the opposite direction, actually in our lane. And this gentleman had been up like on a bender all night drinking, had gotten on the freeway in the opposite direction. It was going about 100 miles an hour, and he just took us out. I mean, we didn't see it coming. Mm-hmm. The police officers told me much later that Frank had tried to swerve at the end, but it was all
too late.
Yeah, it was just kind of like, and they're not even sure if he had his headlights on. So that was another piece.
It sounds like he didn't if you had no indication
Well, sometimes when you're coming over a rise, you
Oh,
you
that's
wouldn't
true.
necessarily.
If he's going 100 miles an hour, I mean,
Right.
who
Doesn't
can
even
come up-
matter.
Yeah, you can't. Who can come
It
against
was,
that?
it was, when I say out of nowhere, it was out of nowhere. Then I kind of regained consciousness in the vehicle. And the first thing was I heard Carys crying. And I just had this mom, like crazy mom gut instinct was like, I've got to get to my baby. I've got to get to my baby. I remember I was kind of on my stomach. The car had rolled. And I'm trying to get to her. I'm having this out-of-body experience. I'm in shock. And my whole arm is just like this noodle. It was shattered, and I was trying to use my arm to kind of get to her where I could hear her crying. My arm's covered in blood. I'm trying to get to her. I don't really even see Frank at this point or hear him. So thus ensues some difficult moments. I ultimately heard people outside the car, and I just started screaming, like, get my baby out, get my baby out, get my baby out. And then they got Carys out, and I just kind of like gave up in that moment. I could see and I'm grateful for this, I could only see part of Frank's leg. So I kind of feel grateful that, my last image of him really was that kind of smiling, chatting, laughing face. And I saw the leg. My brain just couldn't process what was going on with him. I was so focused on my child. And then the car started to catch on fire. And then I caught on fire. And that was pretty horrifying.
And your brain knew you knew that you were on fire.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you don't not know.
Well, I didn't know how the shock worked. Right.
I mean, I can kind of laugh about it. I've had some trauma therapy that helps me, but yeah, that was intense to say the least. So I catch on fire, and then I feel this cooling. People were clearly outside the vehicle with fire extinguishers. I don't know if the EMS is on site at that point. I can't really remember. Well, obviously I was...
Who got Carys out?
I don't know if it was police or EMS or firefighters. She was out because I remember just this overwhelming, the relief that she was alive, right? Because I heard her crying. And then the relief when she was removed from the car. And then at that point, I was just kind of like, all right.
The adrenaline stopped.
Game over.
Yeah.
Game over. I was having a lot of trouble breathing. I, had multiple injuries, and was later told by surgeons and medical staff that several of my injuries, people just do not come off the road. They just don't make it. So by the grace of God, so I'm in the car. I'll drag it out. I'm in the car, and these are just what I remember. I mean, I have no idea how long. I have no idea who was there. I have no idea what was going on, really.
Right.
But I do remember the fire extinguishers put out, it was mostly my left leg, put out the fire. And then this firefighter or EMT is standing outside of the open window. And they are calling in the accident. And they say, injured woman, injured child, and 1 DOA.
Oh, my gosh.
And I was like, oh, my God. Because I'm absorbing this information that Frank is dead. And so that happens. And then the next thing I know, there's this gentleman, I don't know if it was the back of the car or the side of the car, who's in the window with a big old firefighter hat, like an old school firefighter hat. And he is trying to talk to me, and he's trying to get me out of the car. And he's saying, what's your name? And stay with me and all those things. And I mean, I think I'm saying, but I can barely get words out at this point. And then the last thing I remember is they're pulling me. And I don't know how that even worked because both of my arms were shattered and both of my legs were shattered. And so I don't even know where they were pulling me from. But I was pulled. I remember there was a lot of glass. I remember the smell of the burning and the metal and all of it. And that's it. I don't remember anything from that point until waking up in the hospital, probably 5 to 6 days later or something like that.
So Carys was at a different hospital, right?
She was life flighted to Dell Children's, and I was life flighted to what was Brackenridge and is now the UT.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually been torn down, that
So
hospital.
they had to tell you your daughter was at a different hospital when you woke up 5 days later, or what?
Yes. Apparently, someone was just telling me this. I'm going to lighten the mood for a second. Apparently,
Please do.
I know, right?
Yeah.
A friend was just telling me last week that when I was intubated, I was in and out, in and out, in and out. And the people around me, so there was a whole other team of people with Carys, like friends, family with Carys. And then there was a whole team of people around me. And then the people with me would say, I'd wake up and I would try to ask about Frank. And they would immediately say, Carys is okay, Carys is okay, Carys is okay, because she was very critical, but no one wanted to tell me that because I was very critical. So it was kind of like my mom told me later, we didn't know if I was going to live. And so they were sort of spoon feeding me information as needed. And my mom said it was so hard because we had to say, Frank can't be here right now. He can't. Carys is okay. Frank can't be here right now. And I guess, somewhere in my subconscious, I was like, bullshit, because I knew.
Because you heard.
you'd already
You had
heard
already
it.
heard that.
Yeah.
I knew, but I didn't want it to be I didn't want it to be
Sure.
true. So every time I came out of unconscious, I would ask for him. And everyone was like, oh my God. We'd all look at each other and say, who's going to tell her? What are we doing here? Like, what do we say?
Who told you?
I think it must have been my dad. My dad was the first person I saw when I finally woke. I think, he told me. But, I don't know about you guys. I just still couldn't process it for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I still thought he was like maybe alive for like a really long time.
Right.
I'm embarrassed to say how long that went on. But I was
Well,
like,
you were on a lot of drugs, I'm sure.
I was on a lot of drugs. My body, had been just smashed to pieces and there was a lot of trauma there. So yeah,
And the brain is also trying to save
I
you,
couldn't,
too.
right.
Yeah.
We're all three reading that book. I don't know if you were too. but
Body keeps the score.
Body
Yeah.
keeps the score because
Yeah.
it's trying to protect you from all the damage at one time. That's why people go into shock. Because
Yeah.
it saves you from having all that information at one time because you can't handle it.
I definitely did not accept that at the time.
I'm glad your dad was the one that told you because you have a good relationship with him.
Yeah, my dad was the first person I saw when I woke up. And again, they kept telling me I hadn't seen my kids. I know they were picked up at camp by other families that were there. They also went through their own really difficult day of driving home with other families. They're at camp. Their parents don't show up. They don't know what's going on. Some of the families didn't know what was going on. They came back to Tarrytown to a friend's house. The priest came from our church down the road, and they were told. So I didn't even get to tell my kids what was going on, that their dad had died. Carys,
They knew that day. They were told
yes,
that day.
they were told later that day.
I guess, of course, because
Yeah.
Well, they
Yeah.
were like,
Keep
where
that.
are my parents?
yeah,
Yep. And then I know, again, I'm in ICU, so I don't know the timeline on all that, but I know it was later that day. And I don't know when my parents arrived. I know that they were called and told to they live in Alexandria, Virginia, so in the area where I grew up, and they had to get on a flight. I know they got on a flight like immediately. And so I wake up, my dad tells me, and then I just was fighting for my life still. I was kind of, had many, many, many internal injuries. I had burns. I had broken bones. I just had doctors in and out. There were so many people, too, that were there to visit. And I remember people had to stand outside the room and kind of police that a little bit because people would come in and try to talk to me. I would literally just pass out in the middle of the conversation.
Yeah.
I was just so exhausted and on a lot of medication. And then I'm trying to remember when I saw the kids. I think they didn't want the kids to see me until I was a little more stable. So, gosh, that was probably a week and a half.
oh wow,
In the meantime, my husband's family comes to Austin. They my father-in-law and my sister-in-law, they take care of everything. They handled the funeral services.
I don't understand why
they created a
Did you do a second funeral service?
You know,
or?
it's interesting because I'm coming up on, well, this year's 9 years. I thought like at 10 years, I never had anything. They had this service within a week. No one was there except for my 11-year-old daughter. She's the only one. My son could not handle it. And my best friend from back home was with them, and she just said, he's not going. He can stay with me.
Did anybody, and maybe you've never had this conversation, but did anybody tell Frank's parents, hey, this probably isn't a good idea right now?
Because you can, I know people that
I
wait
have
a
no
full year
idea.
to do a celebration of life. Because they
Was
want to
he
wait.
cremated or buried?
He was cremated.
Okay.
I
So
have
that
no
really could have
idea.
waited.
They were in their own grief and they thought really
I do not
thinking-
hold any resentment, I just want to say, towards them for any of that. I mean, if I had been in a position to discuss it, I may have said, hey, let's hold off and wait until we can all be present. But they did what they felt that, needed to happen at the time.
And did your friends attend?
Yes. Oddly enough, I was just recently going through the closet and found the guest book. And I mean, there were so many people there. I haven't been able to look through a lot of those things. I'm sure you guys can relate.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just going through that guest book and I was like, oh my gosh, they were there and they were there. Because here in Austin, as you know, summer was kind of in full swing. Our kids get out early June, unlike East Coast, which is sort of later in June. And people were, at camp, traveling, on vacation. And so I was kind of amazed to see how many people actually were in town and did attend. And I have a video of it. I know people said it was amazing.
Have you watched the video?
I have not watched
Yeah.
the video.
That's hard.
Yeah,
to-
that's hard.
I know, 9 years out. I gotta put
Maybe
on my
we can all watch
I
you
gotta put on my
together.
big girl panties.
No, you don't. No, you absolutely
have
don't.
to.
That's
Oh, I think 9 years out means nothing when the grief hits. That's an intense feeling, and it
Yeah.
takes you right back to that
Oh,
very
yeah.
first
Just
day.
talking about it here takes you
Yeah.
right back to that.
And that is just as intense today. 9 years, 11 years, 5 years, 6 years, 25 years.
It's actually sometimes worse. I was trying to explain this to somebody. Shock is a protector.
Yeah.
But you don't have that ability anymore because when that wears off, then it all
Yeah.
comes rolling in and it's like a tidal wave that
Yeah.
pulls you under. So
I had so much buffering me in that period of time because it was.
The
I
drugs.
had. I was on a lot. I was on a lot of Dilaudid. I had multiple surgeries. I mean, the team of doctors that would come in multiple times a day and say, "This is what we're doing next. This is what we have to repair. This is the next steps." The wound care people, the surgeries, and then after that, it was rehab and all kinds of things. So I was very much. I knew in my heart I had to get back to my kids.
That's what I was going to ask, where your mental state was. And I'm sure it fluctuated from day to day, but was it always, I got to get back to my kids?
Always. And they put this photo, the nurses had some amazing nurses. They put this picture of the kids up in the room. And that was kind of my motivating. I just wanted to get well and back to my kids. Little did I know how long of a road that really was. I just kind of couldn't even absorb all of the damage that had been done to my body. They told my parents I might not walk again. I mean, they were looking for a liver transplant. It was a lot. And so,
Where's Carys at this point?
I was just about to ask
So
what
she-
happened with her physically.
well, I remember this very clearly. I was told, like I said initially, she's fine, she's fine, she's fine. She's at Dell Children's. There was a team. I mean, I had friends round the clock spending the night with her because it's like my family's really small. So my mom's kind of home with the big kids. My dad was with me, mostly advocating for me. And then it was friends and family with Carys. And it was a team of people that would spend the night there, on a pad in her room So Carys has suffered some broken bones, both arms, one leg, She had a liver laceration that was less severe than mine, fortunately. Some fractures to her face and things like that. And she had a head trauma. She had a brain injury with a bleed. And later I found out she had something called an internal decapitation, which is a pretty horrifying term.
Yeah.
And adults don't generally survive. I think in children it's about 20%. It might even be less. Her head just kind of came off from the force of her neck, and she was not stable. And this was the critical piece that people didn't really tell me. But a couple weeks later, a surgeon from Dell came to see me at Brackenridge.
Because you're not making any medical decisions for her.
I was not.
Right.
I mean, until this point, when
Right.
they came and said, they were kind of waiting to see if the ligaments would kind of tamp down and kind of stabilize, but it wasn't happening. And so the surgeon came from Dell and spoke to me in the hospital and just said, we have to do this like pretty major surgery on your child. And we wanted to speak to the mother. And they just said, we have to fuse these vertebrae. Otherwise, she's just not going to be stable. And I remember just saying, well, what are the alternatives? And they said, really not. If she's not stable, then she could be paralyzed. And I just said, go ahead and do it. Fortunately, that went well. And that was kind of the only time when I kind of realized, this was pretty serious, what she had gone through as well. So she really did take quite a blow in the car.
I mean, it sounds like you all should have died. That's really what I keep thinking. I mean, the blessing is you all didn't die.
Yeah.
And he took the brunt. It could have protected her.
Yeah. No, of course. But in my mind, I ultimately did come to feel as though he said, I'll go, save them. That's kind of really just how I feel in my heart. And the fact that my kids were not orphaned that day. I mean, there was a lot of discussion around behind the scenes, thank God or not, I was blissfully unaware of just all the other trauma that was going on in terms of like trying to locate our will and who would take over the children and what would happen.
Did you guys have a will?
We had a will that was kind of we were in the process of sort of tinkering and getting it finalized. So we had one, but it wasn't signed and dotted. And
oh, yeah.
And that's a big mistake for all you listeners. Get your
will.
Get your paperwork in order.
Yeah.
That ended up being a massive headache for me.
So how is Carys now? How's she doing now physically?
Carys is great. She's really great. The kid is just tough. And she's just a gift.
She's a badass.
So everything in her neck, everything fused back together and she's good? Or
Well, she has like some limited range of motion.
Can she do a cartwheel?
At one point, I had her in tumbling, and because her little friend was doing tumbling, and the other dad of the friend is a neurosurgeon, and he was like, what is Carys doing in this tumbling class? Like, get her out of this tumbling class like, immediately.
Do you
And I
tend
was
to
like,
forget?
Oh, I just thought, I early on put her in swim because her range of motion, she can turn her head sort of 3/4 to the right. She's not going to be, thank God they have backup cameras in the cars now, because she's not going to be pulling the
Behind
all the way
shoulder.
around
to
back up the car. I would say that's the only real physical limitation. And then, that the head trauma has created some, learning challenges and regulatory challenges for her. But she's amazing.
But when you meet her, none of that comes across. If you do not know her story, you do not get, she's spirited, she's beautiful and fun. And
I feel like all your kids are like that. I
They're
think
good
all
kids.
of our
Thank
kids,
we're very fortunate, all of us. We have good
nobody would
kids.
look at our kid and, any of our kids and be like, oh, wow, they've been through some shit.
No.
But they have.
Yeah.
And continue to go through shit.
They're resilient. They really are. And thank God, I've thought about a million things. Like at one point I was like, well, maybe what if I'd been driving? And Frank was such an amazing dad. I mean, I know you guys didn't know him, but he was just loved being a dad, and he was an amazing dad. And I thought, gosh, in your low moments, you're like, well, he'd be doing a better job than I'm doing right now.
How are you physically now? I mean, you look great, and I've seen you dance.
So
You
So
have?
I feel like I've seen.
I don't think you have any physical limitations anymore. We used to soul cycle together, this group. So
Yeah,
I
Not
know
me. That was before me. I don't
was
cycle.
This was before
Only the
W.
blonde cycle.
Only the
But
blondes.
the three blondes used to soul
Yeah, we
cycle
did.
every Friday together. That was so much fun.
it was so much fun. I have a Peloton now. I still like to cycle. I gave up running, but yeah, I just kind of do most everything else. Really try to keep my muscles strong to support all my bones because they all are compromised now.
You have
for the most part.
celiac disease.
Oh yeah, I also have an autoimmune.
Was that?
Least of my worries.
I didn't know if an autoimmune system could be jarred. I don't know.
Now that
it's
I've been
easy.
through all this other stuff, that's just kind of an afterthought.
But isn't that kind of the beauty of some of the tragedies? Some of the things we thought, I remember, Holly, you and I talking about this. You said, I thought I had anxiety before all this happened. I mean, true, I was worrying about stupid things. And now that wouldn't even register with me because like all of us have been through something so much
That's
harder.
one of the things
Yeah.
I really try to look at the blessings. Where's the light in all this darkness? And you guys are one, but perspective is one. And I lose it still, and have to remind myself,
You
especially
definitely
lately.
are the sunshine of the group, Whitney.
Well,
clear.
it's toxic positivity, which is something it's not all good for you. But there are some blessings in this. And, we're all going through things right now that aren't to do with the death of a husband. But when you don't have a partner to help you deal with it, whether it's sick parents or teenagers or whatever else, other losses.
I have a colonoscopy Friday.
Ugh. I'm so
that
sorry.
propofol, I'm actually jealous.
Thank
The
God my
propofol is
boyfriend's
awesome.
going to take me. But before I'm in a relationship now, but before that, I would have called one of you guys and said, "Hey, who wants to take me to my colonoscopy?"
Yeah.
Because you really have to rely on your friends and your people.
Mm-hmm.
And I leaned on people a ton.
I relied on Uber a lot too, because if a lot of people were working and busy, sometimes that was how I got to the dentist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or 'cause I like to take Xanax when I go to the dentist. I'm very
Oh my
afraid of
gosh.
the dentist.
I was
As
going
you
to
can
say.
imagine,
Right. That
that
makes
triggers a
sense.
whole lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
And
But when hard
but-
things are coming up, I think we all say, we've been through hard things and we know we're strong enough to handle whatever's coming next. So for those of you that are listening, even if in this moment, because we don't always feel strong, but you need to know that you're going to be okay. And we're living proof of that you're going to go through hard stuff, but you can survive it and thrive in it. I know I keep saying that. People are going to roll their eyes, survive and thrive. But that is the
But
truth.
it is true.
Yeah.
We have our down days still, but we still have a lot of good days too.
Yeah. And that's what we want to remind people that are in the darkness right now.
And I think the main
is
thing is
light.
you got to find your people. I think that's what we all want to stress is that you can listen to our podcast. You can also look at the Instagram, but find your people. I think it's really important.
And with that, thank you, Keira. That was really
Sure.
Keira.
Hard one.
That's a hard one.
Not fun to talk about that, but
We
people
appreciate
always
you
want to
sharing.
know. They want to know what happened, and they want to know the details and it's every family's nightmare. I know not every family's nightmare, but I know that in
I
the
would think
community
every family's nightmare.
there were people that were like, "Oh my God," and talk about being like that family and that everyone knowing your story. Well, it's good and bad. I know you talked about like switching schools, and with my kids, Aislinn had just switched to school, and I think in that school really embraced us. She was at St. Andrew's Episcopal, which I'm going to shout out to them because they embraced our family, and in a way, it was nice for me because I didn't have to be meeting new people all the time and explaining myself.
Right.
So everyone just knew the deal and didn't have to. Me and the kids didn't have to kind of like
Explain it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I love the whole thing about this podcast that's really cool is we're all very different and how we handled it was very different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.